If you're tuning into Green Drinks, you're at the right place. We're just going to give people a little more time to tune in. So enjoy these slides for a few minutes. We'll be right with you. If you're just joining us for Green Drinks, you're in the right place. Hang in there. We're going to give people a little bit of time to be late, but we'll be starting in just a few seconds. Welcome to Green Drinks, everybody, and we'll be with you in a few seconds. We're going to just start in very briefly. Hang in with us. All right. I think we're ready. So if we can get my pretty face on that screen, that would be great. There we are. Hi. Hi, my name's Katie Breckheimer, and welcome to Green Drinks. We are so glad you're spending an hour with us. We are doing a virtual. This is our second one. We learn a little bit more every time. And I'm going to turn it over to Katie Morris just to give you a brief tutorial on Zoom if you've not done it before. So Katie, give us a little tutorial.
Thanks, Katie. Like Katie said, my name is Katie Morris. I'm an AmeriCorps member at Mountain True. I'm here mostly for tech support, so I'm just going to jump in here at the beginning. I know a lot of folks have spent a lot of time on Zoom so far, but in case it's new to you or in case the webinar format's new, you should see at the bottom of your screen, you have the option to chat. And if you open the chat box, you can send a message to folks. That's a great place if you have some sort of technical issue or you can't hear us. We can try to help you with that there. And then also at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box. And that's a great place to put in questions. You can ask questions and then if Lauren has a time that she wants to answer those, we'll take those as they come. And you should also have a raise hand option, which you can use, but we'll probably stick to the chat and the Q&A. Since this is a webinar, you all don't have video or audio, so don't worry, we can't see you. You should just be able to see us. And if you have any other questions about the way Zoom works, feel free to drop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. We are recording this webinar, so if you missed something and want to check back in later or know folks that aren't able to attend, it'll be up on our Facebook page on Mountain True and hopefully Conserving Carolina's Facebook page later this week. I'll pass it back to Katie.
Great. Great. Thank you, Katie Morris. It's kind of confusing. We have two Katies. I'm one with the K and Katie's with the C. So what we're going to do this evening is the usual format for Green Drinks. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do, and then we're going to talk about who's coming up, because we are once a month doing this on the second Thursday of every month, and we have some exciting upcoming speakers. And then we're going to turn it over to Lauren Pyle, who is our guest speaker tonight. and she's going to speak for about 35 minutes. So like Katie said, if you have a question, hang in there, put it on your Q&A, type it in. And Lauren has designed a few breaks in her talk so we can address them, or if we don't get to them, then we'll get to them at the end for sure. So ask questions, and please do, because we'll enjoy our virtual interaction that way. And I'm very hopeful that maybe next month we will be back at Appalachian Coffee, because that's where we were getting together. I miss the social part of our green drinks. And Appalachian Coffee has this great back room with garage doors that I have this vision that we'll roll up the garage doors and people can sit out on their deck at the appropriate social distance. We'll wear masks, but we'll keep you posted on June's Green Drinks, whether we do it virtually or in person. So Green Drinks is sponsored locally by Conserving Carolina and Mountain True. These are the absolute best environmental organizations in Western North Carolina. I encourage you to join both if you're not members. Go to their website, check us out, and we will look forward to having you as members. So Green Drinks is an international movement. Green Drinks like ours is happening all over the world. We're one of 500 chapters where people get together and they have interactions, they network, and then they learn and talk about the environment. All of them don't have speakers. Some of them are more formal, some of them are less formal, but we are part of an international movement, which I like to tell people. So let's talk a little bit about our upcoming speakers. So in June, we're having a reschedule. In March, we had to cancel our Green Drinks, and we have invited Carlene Dixon to come back. Carlene is the director of Henderson County Parks and Recreation, and she's going to talk to us about what's happening with our parks. Our parks are open for the most part, and a lot of people are using them. A lot of people need them, but a lot of things aren't happening at our parks right now because of our situation with the coronavirus, and Carlene's going to talk about that as well. So in July, let me check here. Andrew Tate is going to join us, and Andrew is with a company called Eco Foresters, and he's going to present on positive impact forestry. In August, Tony Dunn is going to be with us. He's a retired fire ecologist, and Tony and his wife actually call themselves climate refugees. So they have moved to Western North Carolina from California, where 2 years ago, well, not quite, it was 2018, where they had the horrific Paradise fires there, and that's where Tony and his wife lived. So he's going to tell us his story in August. So I especially am delighted with our topic today because that's my field. I'm an environmental educator. I was trained that way. I've had a 25-year career in environmental education, and I really think it is so, so valuable. I also feel that it goes hand in hand with people advocating for the environment, that we not only need to educate our citizens, but we need them to act and ask their leaders for laws that protect our environment and for the funding that supports those laws so that they can be more effective. And that goes hand in hand with environmental education, and I've come to learn that more and more over the years. So let me talk to you a little bit about Lauren Pyle. Lauren has both a master's and a bachelor's degree from Cornell University. She thought she wanted to be a high school science teacher, and she ended up taking a less formal route by being an instructor at a summer camp. And that kind of launched her career. She has been an educator at the North Carolina Arboretum and at the Western North Carolina Nature Center, two of our very special environmental education hotspots here in Western North Carolina. She has worked here in the region for the last 10 years. And she's working at home a lot too. She's very busy with her two sons. She has a 3- and 5-year-old, and she said she's got some pictures of them, which I look forward to seeing. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, and I want her to talk to us about her role as Executive Director of Environmental Educators for North Carolina. Thanks for being with us.
Excellent. Well, thank y'all so much for having me. So I'm here for the next little bit to talk to y'all about creating an environmentally literate society. And just to give you a bit of an overview for what we're going to talk about today, I want to do some introductions, get into what is environmental literacy and environmental education, to think about ways that you can put environmental education into action, to talk about the future of the field and next steps if you're ready to get involved more. And so thank you, Katie, for that great introduction. My name is Lauren Pyle. I am the Executive Director for the Environmental Educators of North Carolina. The Environmental Educators of North Carolina, or EENC, is a statewide nonprofit organization that was founded in the 1990s in the Triangle area by educators, classroom teachers, higher ed faculty, volunteers, community members who wanted to get together to start thinking about ways to really strategize about creating opportunities for child learning with the natural world. And part of this is that the world is changing. You know, if you remember back in your own childhood, growing up, catching fireflies, playing in the creek, building a fort in your yard, most kids today aren't growing up in that world, and they aren't going to have a vested interest in protecting our natural resources and natural spaces without those kinds of experiences. And so environmental educators are working across the state to change this. And so we believe that environmental education is a learning process that increases knowledge, develops skills, fosters commitments to empower learners to make decisions for a sustainable future. And with EENC, we think about this is that we want to change the world. And we do this by 4 very distinctive strategies. To tell you just a little bit about who we are. First off, we provide professional development and networking for educators. We have an annual conference every year. We have mini conferences. We have regional professional development and networking events for anyone who self-identifies as an environmental educator or who wants to become one. And we've got online webinars coming soon, so that's going to be a new opportunity that we're providing. We also think about ourselves as an organization that wants to bring like-minded organizations together to build capacity. So with EENC, we are the North Carolina affiliate for the North American Association for Environmental Education, or NAAEE. We also work with our other similar state-level organizations throughout the Southeast in an organization called SEA, an alliance, the Southeastern Environmental Education Alliance. We work with other state affiliates all over the country, but we also here in North Carolina work with a variety of other partners, like the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education and Public Affairs. There's another association called the North Carolina Association of Environmental Education Centers. So we work with a broad variety of organizations to come together to say, how can we collectively work to build capacity and make the greatest impact for North Carolina's learners? We also have a very strong focus about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the field of environmental education. We think that the future of environmental education should look a lot different than our present and our past in many ways. And everyone has a role to play in this. And how we're addressing this and working on this as an organization are through things like trainings about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the environment. We're building partnerships with other organizations who might have been who might not think of themselves as environmental educators, but are doing amazing community work to see how we can collaborate together. We're doing social media campaigns. We have a hashtag EE for all that we use to help share resources. We have an online library. If you're interested in diving into this, I highly suggest you go to our library because we have everything from like making the case to deep diving more to how to really incorporate this into your teaching. We've gathered resources from across the way. And we want to work with, there's a really amazing local group, if you haven't heard, I gotta plug them, Everybody's Environment. They're based out of the Asheville area, so if you want to know more about them, talk to me later, please. But we want to work with them to help think about this question. And the last big bucket we have for EENC of how we want to change the world is by promoting excellence in environmental education. So we do annual awards, we have a mini grant program, and we do trainings on the guidelines for excellence, which you'll hear about in a little bit. So all of those are what we do to fulfill our mission, to provide professional development, build connections, and promote excellence for North Carolina's community of environmental educators. And our end vision is to see an environmentally literate society. And so if you haven't heard of environmental literacy before, or if you have heard about it, or even if you're an expert on it, what I'd like to know now, and I'm gonna call in Katie Morris for some help, is if you have access to the chat, to just tell me what you think of when you think of environmental literacy.
You should all be able to see the chat at the bottom of your screen, so you can just type it in there and we'll be able to see them, and I'll share them out loud.
And there are no wrong answers.
We've got one from Grace. She says, general knowledge about nature and human impacts on the environment. Another one from Jan that says L&T. Grady and Kathleen Nance have said knowing about issues related to environment. We also have one from Anne that says acknowledging that humans are affecting the environment. All good answers.
Nice.
Another one that says, from Erica, knowing how to interact with and take care of the earth. And then one from Chris that says, knowing how to experience various environments safely and with attention to each one's distinctive character.
Well, I think I should stop now because y'all have it. In so many ways, I think you've captured so many of the different aspects of environmental literacy. And here in North Carolina, we're a really special state. We have an environmental literacy plan that helps to lay a framework for how we want to do this for students. And we define environmental literacy in that plan as the ability to make informed decisions about issues affecting shared natural resources while balancing cultural perspectives, the economy, public health, and the environment. And so being environmentally literate captures so many of the things that you all included in the comments. A lot of you mentioned things about like knowledge and understanding of systems. How does the world work? How does that environment work? But another key component of environmental literacy is how you feel about the environment. What experiences have you had with it? Then you get to, well, what do I do about those feelings? How am I, your L&T skills, right? How do you interact in this space? What do you know how to do? Both physical skills as well as mental skills. What do you think about that? How does that factor into your decision making? And then ultimately, what is the action and civic engagement that results in? And so when we think about a person being environmentally literate, they are proficient at all of these skill levels. And that's really a lot to ask of people in many ways. But for us, we think of environmental education as the way that we're gonna get there. And so when you think of environmental education experiences, what kind of experiences do you think? Katie, I'm gonna ask you again, if you could put that in the chat. What are the environmental education experiences that you think of?
We've got hiking, and we also have nature walks come in on the chat. Spending time in nature, hands-on being in nature, learning outside, being a teenager, going on a Christmas bird count. That's a good one. And then we also have camping, gardening, and fishing. Cleaning rivers. We have learning details of how environments work, and field trips, and tagging monarchs. Oh, that sounds fun. And learning details of how environments work and cause and effect.
Wonderful. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts with that. I've got a couple of pictures coming up here. Oh, one too far. When we think about environmental education, it looks very different in very many places. Just like our environmental topics are very system-based, you can incorporate environmental education into anything from anthropology to zoology and everything in between. And so when we think about environmental education in action, it might look something like this. You might think of guided experiences with an educator leading the way, facilitating some sort of learning opportunity in the outdoors. A lot of you mentioned those hands-on, engaging, personal elements. And no, just so you know, the girl in the picture did not just go out and catch a bird. That was part of a Miss Netting experience at an organization. Actually, up at the North Carolina Arboretum, they shared this photo. But it's that hands-on engaging piece where people get to experience that opportunity for themselves, that exploration, that discovery. But environmental education also takes place in classrooms, in formal spaces. And so whether that's something that's done at, as regular classroom teachers or as guest experiences, it can be auditorium productions. It can take place in those shapes too. And then, like many of you mentioned, those opportune teachable moments. In the baby in the top left corner, that is my youngest son when he was about I think 8 months old. And that is him in the, actually in the Davidson River here, right in this area. And so we think about environmental education overall as a learning process that increases that knowledge and awareness about the environment and those associated challenges, helps develop those skills and expertise to address those challenges, and fosters the attitudes, motivations, and commitments to make informed decisions and take responsible action. And who are environmental educators? Just about everyone. There are so many people who are involved in this process, and they need to be. Good environmental education doesn't happen in a one-time place or a one-time space. It is woven through experiences and reaching from pre-K to senior centers, from non-formal like nature play-based to university courses. Really every spectrum of folks, you have people being environmental educators. And I hope if you don't already come to this webinar thinking of yourself as one of these people, but by the time we're finished, you'll be thinking of adding yourself to this list as well. With environmental education, just a little bit more background, there are some essential underpinnings that we can think about this. And these are not something that we just made up. These are pieces that the North American Association for Environmental Education has laid out as their framework in what they have called the Guidelines for Excellence. And I gotta put a plug in, if you haven't experienced the Guidelines for Excellence, haven't seen them, they're really the collective knowledge of our field about what are the best practices for good environmental education. But all of them, there's guidelines about early childhood learning and non-formal learning and classrooms and community development, all kinds of, there's 6 different sets, but all of them focus on these essential underpinnings. The first is system thinking. You got to think about the world as made of many, many living parts and non-living parts that work together. And there are nested layers of systems. It is important to embrace that holistic picture through environmental education. We also have to think about humans as being a part of that. Humans and the systems they create, the societies, political systems, economies, religions, cultures, technologies, these impact the total environment and are impacted by the environment. Good environmental education is also inclusive, respectful, equitable, and designed to employ the talents of people with diverse backgrounds and experiences and perspectives. The importance of where one lives, that sense of place, is also very critical with environmental education. Starting with what's in your yard, what's outside your window. Those are the connections that people are going to take that will let them bridge to those broader perspectives, to that other part of the world. But if you don't start locally, people are going to have a much harder time building that broader bridge. Environmental education is also reflective of the best practices in education. It's learner-centered, experiential, project-based, and it's also based on sound science. And there's a focus on investigation, analysis, and problem solving, because for many of our environmental issues, the solutions don't yet exist. The solutions that balance the environmental factors, the human needs, economies, all of those societal impacts. If we had the answers, we'd be there. And so we need that investigation and analysis and problem solving to solve tomorrow's problems, because they might not be the same issues we're facing today. Environmental education is interdisciplinary. It's not one subject. You can focus on art, literature, science, math, all kinds of ways to integrate environmental education into the curriculum. And it's a lifelong process from cradle to grave. And there really is the importance of it being built on a sustainability platform. You know, the health of the environment is inseparable from human well-being and economic prosperity. So learning has to be future oriented, and it has to be focused on environmental, social, and economic responsibility as the driver of individual and institutional choices. There's a lot happening here. And I know on the slide, if you're looking at it, there's a lot to go on. I'm happy to share a link. This is a snippet from a white paper our organization put together. But the moral of this story is that there is research out there that shows that environmental knowledge is just the tip of the iceberg. So when people come to an environmental education program, when students have that high quality learning experience, they're getting this time in and connection to the outdoors that research is showing it improves academic performance, physical, mental, emotional health. You know, it encourages critical thinking, personal growth, and life building skills like confidence, autonomy, leadership. It increases civic engagement, reduces discipline and classroom management problems, and gets, you know, this is probably not a surprise for many people, it gets kids excited and engaged in learning. So it is not this, you know, thing that's a nice to have. I think that, you know, our connection to nature and in our environmental education, we need to treat it as a need to have, because it is just as good for people as it is for our planet. Because the world today is different. You know, if you think about your experiences with the questions I asked at the beginning and you're like, yeah, lightning bugs, sports, all those things, that was my childhood. Because I'll say that was mine. But that's overall not the world we're seeing today. If you haven't heard the term nature deficit disorder, it was coined by an author, Richard Louv, and it really captures a lot of what's happening right now. Overall, the general population is pretty disconnected from nature. And this is just a few statistics to demonstrate that. You know, kids, elementary school age kids, there's research out there that many of them spend only 4 to 7 minutes of unstructured outdoor play per day. But they spend over 7.5 hours in front of electronic media. Childhood obesity rates are growing incredibly dramatically. Physical activity rates for high schoolers are dropping. Math and science performance on for US 8th graders, only about 1/3 of kids across the country are performing at and above standards for math and science. And then there are also a lot of mental components. So 1 in 5 kids has a serious mental health disorder at some point in their lives. Environmental education and that connection to nature, they're critical for that physical, mental, and emotional health, as well as just that knowledge base. And so that's why we think about, you know, that's why we do this work, is to change the face of our world today. Any questions so far?
We had one comment come in through the Q&A from Anne that says, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, House Bill 763, covered all of the points that you mentioned previously.
That's awesome to see that in legislation.
And then we had a book recommendation come in from Chris through the chat that says, Citizen Scientist by Mary Ellen Hannibal is a great read for folks that are interested in getting volunteers engaged with kids.
Nice, thank you.
That's all we got right now.
Awesome. Well, the next part is to think about how you can put environmental education into action. So some people, you can be a career environmental educator. You know, that's what I was when I was with the North Carolina Arboretum, when I was with the WNC Nature Center. That was what I did for my job. But in my role now, I really want to challenge everyone I talk to think of yourselves as environmental educators. Because whatever your career, your life stage, you have the potential to educate others. And there are a few really good underlying pieces that I think might be some tips and tricks that help you really get the most out of that. And so one circumstance that I think a lot of people face is, how do you help the kids in your life? Whether that's your own children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, your neighbors, how can I help them? And again, that is the kid in the puddle is my baby, a little bit older. But thinking about the kids in your life, the first step is to make it developmentally appropriate. You know, there's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of information that says this is, a lesson plan or activity. But sometimes all you need to let kids do is to be out there and exploring with them. You know, they need that opportunity for you to be their guide on the side to go out and say, let's do this. Let's make it fun. Let's make it approachable. And then follow where you want to go. Because you need to encourage that questioning, that exploration, and that interaction, especially with younger kids. If you're talking about anybody even under age 10, like if you're helping them, let them be the lead of what do they want to learn about, and really let them investigate and focus and build those critical thinking skills at an early age, rather than say, here, sit down, let me tell you all about life cycles. Which is great, you can do that, but the kids in your life are probably not going to appreciate that as much as, raising butterflies, if that's something you want to do, or going outside and flipping rocks to say, what lives under here? My goodness, if my kids could stop flipping the rocks by the mailbox, though, those poor bugs have been examined many times. Anyway, tangent. You got to keep it positive. Especially for kids and young kids. I think sometimes as adults, this can actually be a challenge for us because we see all the things that are happening in the world. There's a lot of actually positive news with recent situations about air quality and water quality. But overall, there's a lot of gloom and doom news out there about the environment. With your kids and grandkids in your life, you need to ignore that. There's actually research out there, to sum up a lot of David Sobel's work, is no bad news before age 10. That's just a developmental thing. They can't process that. And a lot of times when kids are like, the icebergs are melting, the forests are on fire, they're going to shut down, because what 5-year-old has power over the icebergs? If it's too big a problem, it's too scary. But if you can keep it local, you can keep it meaningful to them, they're going to get hooked and they're going to start building that process and their connection. And you can start as local as you can get. What's outside your apartment? What's outside your home? What's outside your community? And build it bigger and bigger and bigger. And there are amazing, amazing local places that we have here in Western North Carolina. Like, I personally live in Etowah. And so there are things in this community like Jimmy Rock, like the Carl Sandburg House, like Hands On, the Pisgah Center for Wildlife Education, the Nature Center and the Arboretum, and any number of our Forest and Creek. Get out and go to those places with those kids in your life. You might be surprised. I used to teach when I was at the Arboretum. We reached a huge percentage of the 8th graders in Buncombe County for doing freshwater ecology. And we would have groups of 8th graders, and it was not uncommon for half the class to have never been in a creek before. This is Buncombe County, y'all. You had to try to not go in a creek, as opposed to if we were talking about kids from like New Mexico, I'd be like, it's okay, there's no water there, you know, in the same way. But these are kids who hit age 13 who have never been in a creek, and it's like half the kids we're working with. And so don't assume that the kids in your life have that experience. Be the one to give it to them. But you might not have kids in your life. You might have adults. And so whether that's adults you're working with professionally, whether that's adult family members, whether that's friends, whether that's business associates or coworkers, you have that opportunity to be an environmental educator for those folks too. Some tips for working for adults. Again, make it developmentally appropriate. You know, adults like to do adult things, except when we don't. But also give them challenges. Make it something that they really want to get into. This is a group of preschool teachers who's like super excited about their binoculars, but they were using it for the first time for some of them. Don't assume universal life experiences, though. That is something that we do as adults. Yeah, I think everybody grew up like me, and that's not true. You know, there's lots of people who had different life experiences growing up, different family stories. I can't tell you the number of grandparents who I've talked to who are parents on, you know, grandparents on field trips who would tell me all about the snake holes, because that is their opportunity. They're convinced that there are snake holes and there are snakes in all the holes. And, you know, if you ask why, you're like, well, I've seen snakes come out of those holes. You're like, oh, that's a life experience. You just made that opportunity, and that's where you're coming from. But you have to ask about that, but don't just assume that everyone has that same piece. Separate sort of from some of our environmental advocate hats is when we think about being an environmental educator, you have to separate yourself from being an environmental advocate and think about fairness and accuracy. And that can be a tough trick to do, because I might say, well, I know the right answer. I know what everyone should be doing. But if you really want to educate someone, that's not how you do it. It's just to say, this is the right way, you're doing it the wrong way. You need to think about giving them that opportunity to look at sources, to review it, and to think about like really fair and accurate information so that people can go, oh, I can start to make decisions. I can start to see patterns. And when I look at that accurate information, I might make a different decision. Because you have to encourage systems thinking. Sometimes we get so pigeonholed to think, well, this is the only thing we should talk about. You know, another thing in a previous life, I was a bat biologist, and I focused on the Indiana bat, which is an endangered species. And so people would be like, but why should I care about one endangered species of bat when there's all these other species of bat? And who should care about that? And you have to step back and try to get people to think about systems. You know, you can't think of like, well, the bat is important. And yes, that was what I was working for, but I was also working for a healthy environment. And that bat had an important job to play. And if that bat wasn't there, what were going to be the repercussions? And I was actually working in bats before white nose. And so to think about what happens when you lose species, how that deals with resilience, even for something like disease, because not every bat is impacted the same for white nose. What does that mean? You know, that thinking about resiliency, you got to encourage that systems thinking. And so people can think of it as more like, why are we dumping money into this one thing? Well, it's not one thing. It's part of a bigger picture. And you can focus on skill building with the adults, and not just like, you can do physical skills. That's always fun for people to learn new physical skills, but think about encouraging how we can build mental skills as well. Critical thinking is something that we take for granted, but there's a lot of new skills. We can think about them as like the 21st century skills. And that's actually a curriculum term, but there are things like teamwork and leadership and public speaking and critical thinking and decision making. They're finding that a lot of students as they're growing up aren't getting these. And so building those skills in people are going to really help moving forward. And then with the adults, you know, this is the piece, is they have the opportunity for civic action. And so you got to tell them when those windows are to get people going. And I'm going to come back to this one at the end, thinking about the ways that you can weave environmental education into your own life, because you all have those opportunities. Because there's sort of two more pieces I want to go over. One is like the future of environmental education. Where is the field going? Because it's different. The environmental education that we have today is very different. When, you know, the first Earth Day was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day this year, if you didn't know that. environmental education looks very different now than it did 50 years ago. And some things that our community is talking about, both locally here in Western North Carolina, at the state level, and at the national level, is there's becoming an increased focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. There is a broader understanding that this is part of the bigger picture, that not everyone has equal access to the outdoors. Not everyone has equal opportunities to learn about the outdoors. And even when people get those opportunities, they might not be currently welcomed there, which is, when you step back and think and look at the research out there, that's frustrating. As someone who personally feels very connected to the outdoors, that we need to start paying attention to this. We need to start having these conversations of how can we make teaching and how can we make experiences in nature more equitable and inclusive. We're also talking about how we can get environmental education woven through the classroom. There's a lot of classroom educators who are feeling pressure that saying, well, we've got it, we're tested in reading and math, so that's all we can do. You know, those are the test subjects, so that's where we're at. And we're trying to think about ways that we can help support that need. And not everybody is that way, and not every school is that way for sure. But how can we get more classroom teachers to weave it into their experiences? Because, you know, if we rely on people who are doing field trips and parent-led programs, that's great for people who have access to that. But going through the classroom is that way to reach broader audiences and maybe really change our society. We want to think about how we can be resilient in education, whether that's through climate change or COVID-19 impacts. How can we connect locally with nature in our communities? You know, there's been sometimes this idea of wilderness, this idea of where we need to go to find nature and the right ways to connect to nature. But we're starting to talk about as a community of how can we broaden that definition so that it's not the 18-day backpacking trip that is the only way that we can connect. The 18-day backpacking trips are awesome, not saying that, but how can we expand our understanding of what this looks like? And how, working together, can our environmental education community think about our collective impact? Because what we're working for is to change the world. Environmental education simply is the education we need for the world we want. We want everybody who participates. EENC wants everyone who participates in EE programs in North Carolina to feel welcome and engaged. We want our state to be environmentally literate. We want the professionals working in this field to reflect our state's residency. And we want environmental education to be something that people recognize and embrace for the value it brings people as well as the planet. And so if you're like, yes, this is what I want to do, there are ways that you can get involved. What you can do, you can learn more about environmental education. You know, there are workshops happening across the state that help people learn about best practices and curriculum and ideas if you're in an opportunity. And even if you're a volunteer in saying, well, I'm going to help with my, you know, my kids' scout troop or my community group. You can come up with these activities and weave them in. There's also, North Carolina has a certificate if you want to go onto this. There's a state level certificate. It's through our Department of Environmental Quality that you can become a certified environmental educator. You can volunteer. You know, if you're like, I love this, but, you know, I don't have kids in my life, or, you know, the adults in my life, maybe I want to do programs. There are organizations all through our region who really need volunteers to help do this critical work. Whether that's through teaching, through interpretation, all kinds of ways that you can get involved. You can also advocate for environmental education. And this is advocacy both as a legal thinking about what are the laws and the funding at the legal level for environmental education, but also local advocacy. Encourage the teachers in your life to get involved. Encourage your local school districts and administration to support environmental education. Advocate, you know, if you have, you know, your neighbor who's like afraid to take their kid outside, to say, it's okay, we can do this together. Let's make that possible for you. And you can connect. If you're thinking, yes, these are all my things, know that there are people like you who care about this across the state. So that is what EENC does. And I have to put in a brief plug for our conference because it's going to be here in our backyard. So we do an annual conference each year. We do all kinds of other events as well, but the one coming up is in Hendersonville. It's at Cayuga, if you've been out there before, and it's going to have a ton of amazing educational sessions. We do a research symposium, field trips, workshops, and our keynote is Dr. Tricia Kane, who developed a program called Birding to Change the World. Part of the reason I want to put this out there is that we're currently accepting presentation proposals and scholarship applications for people who want to either come and share your knowledge and expertise, or who want to come, but especially right now need a bit of a boost to get there, because we offer scholarships both based on need and merit. But that's EENC. And so I can keep talking forever about environmental education, but I want to thank you for coming on this journey with me so far. And I want to open it back up to any other questions or comments that you all have.
We have a question from Chris, it looks like. It says, Lauren, what was the most enlightening experience you have had of attempting environmental education, but it not going the way that you had planned?
The most enlightening experience. For me, it was actually probably one of the first times I worked with early childhood. So my background was in high school education. And when I was a grad student, I TA'd collegiate biology and had done like peer programs. So I had been working firmly in the teenage to adult community. When I started working at the North Carolina Arboretum 10 years ago, I was like, I can do this. They have an amazing program called We Naturalists that is taught by someone much better than me. But at the time they were like, we need you to do We Naturalists. And I said, okay, which is a parent-child program. And I was like, I got this. And like, I sat down and I got ready, and then I met them. And I was like, oh, we're doing colors. This is very different for me. And for me, like, I had this whole like idea of what we were going to do on that very first activity. I'm pretty sure it was on bugs. And like, I had some things put in it, but it was really just eye-opening to me to recognize that not everybody comes to this in the same space, and that especially young kids need that opportunity to learn at their own pace.
We had another question come through from Grady and Kathleen that says, with COVID-19 showing definite impacts of human activity on the environment, for example, cleaner skies with less auto traffic, how might this be incorporated into environmental education?
Certainly, I think that is going to be a piece that it will be really interesting to see how programs do this. Because thinking about our fair and accurate representation, we have data that shows that things are changing. And I think more than those localized impacts, I think it's those opportunities of windows to see how fast things can change. They're going to help people feel empowered through education. They're going to help feel empowered moving towards that civic action and decision making, to say like something as small as 6 weeks is changing the world. What happens if we extend this? I think the more people can learn about that, we're really going to see some interesting effects. But I also, through COVID-19, one of the other pieces I have been hearing a lot is not those, I appreciate the pictures of, India and, the dolphins in Venice and all those pieces, air quality improvements in India. But there's a lot of interest in local nature. People who are saying, well, I never had time to get outside, but now that I'm stuck at home the whole time, like that's the only place I can escape. So I think we're going to have a resurgence and an interest in environmental education and connection to nature as a result of this. At least that's my hope, is that extends.
We had another question come in from Rob that says, now that many of us are teaching online, what suggestions do you have for bringing environmental experiences to students virtually?
That is a great question, and one that I think our entire community is figuring out together. If there could be a word of the year already for environmental educators, it's pivot. So shifting entirely, what did we do before? And so in that transition to online programming, I think the thing to think of is to don't just say, well, I'm going to take whatever I did before and just live stream it. Because that's a great start. But I think we need to rethink our entire systems to say, well, how can we provide these opportunities for people to engage? And I've seen all kinds of awesome things across the state, everything from engagement in community science or citizen science, if you prefer that term, or are familiar with that term, which is a great opportunity for public to go out and collect data on all kinds of research projects and share it. So that being a really strong focus, because it's a way that people can implement immediately. I've also seen things of like, well, we're going to do this activity together through a program, and it's all done with things that you can have at home. So I want you to go out and do it later and show a picture of yourself, or share a video of yourself putting it into action, or the things that you found. So I think we're going to have to come up with these new creative ways for it to go beyond just the virtual program. And I know that this is a conversation we're going to have, so I got to put in a plug. Tomorrow, EENC is actually hosting a sort of a digital roundtable. So it's actually an online conversation on distance learning. How do we do it? How do we do it effectively? And so that's tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And if you go to EENC.org under the events, you'll see it there. But I think we're still discovering what those best strategies are going to be. And I'm really interested to see how what's happening now might change some of our things for many years to come.
All right, we had another question come in from Jan that says, sounds like a lot of work that you all are doing mirrors what the ATC is doing. I assume that Jan means the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, but if not, Jan, chime in. Is one of your community partners the ATC? Do you offer environmental education to local nonprofit organizations?
So with our organization, I know many of the folks with the ATC through the group Everybody's Environment. So I do get to talk to some of them on a regular basis, they're a really great group. And so we do, when we have professional development that we're doing in this area, we do have some of their folks who come and join us sometimes. But we don't think of ourselves as a direct environmental education provider. We're supporting the providers working across the state and across the region. So Appalachian Trail Conservancy does amazing environmental education, and we want to support them as best we can. The Arboretum, the Nature Center, the Riverlink, Asheville Greenworks, even here in Henderson County, the Solid Waste and Recycling Coordinator is an environmental educator. And so we think about all those ways that we can support the people who are doing that work. And so that's what we do. But our goal is that everybody, we get this across the state.
I don't see any other questions right now. So if folks have other questions, go ahead and put those in, or I'll pass it off to Katie to wrap it up.
Yeah, I had a question for you, Lauren. So this is and you may have answered it and I didn't catch it. This is a peer group, Environmental Educators of North Carolina. And how many members are you?
We are over 400 members across the state.
And anyone can join?
Yes, indeed. Anyone can join. And so anyone who thinks of themselves as an environmental educator, whatever hat you wear personally or professionally.
And you are a 501c3. So if there is someone participating today who believes in the value of environmental education and this great group, they certainly are welcome to donate.
Yes, and we are appreciating every support we can get right now, and we are doing our best right now to invest as much support as we can back into our network to see what we can do to lift the field through this really rough time. You know, COVID, I will say COVID has hit environmental educators particularly tough compared to some of the other fields. It's similar to tourism in many ways, because these are programs and professionals, the organizations that do this and the professionals who do this, they rely on field trips and summer camps and programs to be able to pay their staff and to be able to continue to operate and keep their doors open. And so it's been a really interesting time as organizations across the state are negotiating these new transitions.
So Lauren, if somebody watching this would like to come to your conference, it's open. It's open to all shapes and sizes of folks, right?
Yes, indeed. Registration is not quite open yet. But that'll be coming soon. That'll be open next month is our anticipated time for that. But yes, it is open to anyone who'd like to come.
Well, I can attest to this group. I bet you guys are really a fun group and a dedicated group. And my best guess is you've designed a great conference. So I would recommend this coming up in September, and hopefully we won't be in dire straits like we have been with the virus, but I'm sure you all are planning Plan B and C and D and all of that as we don't know what our future holds. So if I would advise everybody out there to support EENC in any way you can. Visit their website. It's a great group, and I am so glad that you were with us today. Thank you so much, Lauren, for telling us about EENC.
And Lauren, we had a participant ask if you could send the link for the virtual learning that happens tomorrow. Is that the one that you sent out to the Everybody's Environment group earlier?
That is a different one here.
Okay, great. Then I will not drop the wrong link.
Pause with my
yes.
my chat here. I will drop it into the chat.
Perfect.
Oh, great.
I knew I had gotten something from you earlier today, but wasn't sure if it was the correct one.
Oh, no, and it's very timely, too, Lauren. That's great. All right, everybody. I think our time is almost up for today, and we sure thank you for being with us. And Lauren has her contact information up on the screen. You can reach her through EENC, through their website. And hope you can come back and be with us next second Thursday in June, and we will let you know whether it's in person or virtual, and we'll be talking with Carlene Dixon about parks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.